So what is our view of Augustine? Well, um, there are a lot of us that hate him. Um, there are some of us who, most of us, hold our tongues and will say, "Blessed Augustine," because of Monica. And the only icons that I've ever come across is the baptism of Augustine. He doesn't have a halo around. He doesn't have the ring of light. Obviously, you guys know the difference between when we say halo and a halo in the West. They're two totally different things. One is a corruption. The other is from uh, Rome and Egypt, which is the correct one. And there are some people who are surprisingly like Augustine and will call him Saint Augustine. For their own theologomena, that's fine. For their in the private prayer corner, just like having an icon of Saint Francis. In the East, he is not a saint, but privately you can have that, just like you can petition your ancestors, right? But many Eastern Orthodox, and I'm sure people know this, I'm surprised that some people don't know this, believe Augustine, and I go back and forth on this, that Augustine was a Manichaean agent. Remember, he was toying with the idea of being a Christian for a while, but he was actually, or claimed to be, he apparently argued against Pelagius, who Pelagius might not have been a heretic. Now, Pelagius, in Augustine's argument, yes, is a heretic only because of the way Augustine paints him. I could be wrong, I'm 98% sure that we have nothing from Pelagius, we just have Augustine's side of it. Before Augustine, the Christianity knew nothing of predestination or original sin. Manichaeanism has you being originally sinful. I mean, think of Gnosticism, right? And people group Manichaeanism with Gnosticism. The Gnostics, sex is the worst thing in the world. The physical world is defiled or made by a lesser god. Well, I can't attribute the pre-existent soul. It's more of an origin type of thing. But Augustine, it goes a few different ways, right? You could say he hated sex. I don't actually take that stance. But a lot of people think he's a Manichaean agent. Why? Because why is he disliked by the East so much? Many of the things that he said, he wound up retracting later in his life. But he sowed the seeds for him. The filioque, the bolstering of the Bishop of Rome, you know, and we know what happened with the Bishop of Rome. He thought he could run roughshod over the ancient seas, and he got the same response from Alexandria, Antioch, Jerusalem, and Constantinople. No, you're not bishop over us, go away. He developed the idea of original sin because he actually encouraged people not to read the texts in Greek, to only read them in Latin. And he was at the end of the time period when people in the West could speak Latin, people in the West could speak Greek, people in the East could speak Latin. After that, you didn't have that anymore. If you look at his view of original sin, it's more like total depravity. I mean, it's real harsh. We usually attribute scholasticism to Anselm, right? The three bad guys, Anselm, Aquinas, and Augustine. But Augustine brings in things that he draws them back, but the Catholic Church built on them. Well, the Roman Papal Latin West, to their credit, didn't fully take on Augustine's idea of when he fleshed out his original sin view. and he did bring in predestination. That was running through Gnosticism, and it was never in the Eastern Church Fathers. Uh, and the West, for a while, actually rejected hesychasm, hesychasticism. The thing that was affirmed by Gregory Palamas. Now you could say John Cassian. Now this is probably an Eastern bias, but the beauty of the Western Rite, I think, wasn't really the Latin Rite, but it was the Gaelic Christianity before the Latin Rite took it over. And even the Latin Rite was beautiful until 1054. Or actually, the seeds were set in about the 5th, 6th century, which is Augustine, right? He's the beginning of the departure. So we had about 500 years drifting apart before formally there was the split in 1054. But the reason why we refer to him as Blessed Augustine is because that's what Chrysostom called him. So we're erring on the highest honor to him. But I don't know of anybody who calls him a saint. There's the Western Rite Orthodoxy, which just seems wrong, and I have videos on that. I'll link to other videos. People said, well, I saw an icon of him, and I basically pulled up an icon of St. John Coltrane, where he has a halo around his head. I mean, there's people who write icons in the Eastern style of Bob Marley, or the Episcopalians had Karl Marx and Charles Darwin. And while we are not creationists, and we're not against evolution, these were not baptized members of the Eastern Orthodox communion. Just like St. Francis, you can write an icon of St. Francis of Assisi, even though he was post-schism, and have it in your own private prayer corner. But it does not belong in a church. So, well, there's some. I mean, even if somebody says, well, there's an icon of St. or of Augustine of Hippo in a church. Okay, so what? I mean, I've seen icons in Orthodox churches where they depict the Father, the most blasphemous, heretical thing you could possibly do. It doesn't make them a saint. If somebody says that they believe Augustine of Hippo is a saint, fine, I'm not going to argue it with them. But he's not a spokesman for the Eastern Orthodox Church, and he is the font of Western heresies. He was the first time where we can point to, and the beginning of, where East and West start to split in thought, in their approach to things, because there were always screwballs everywhere. I mean, you had Tertullian, the first Latin father. I mean, he went off and became a Montanist. People think that I have just unbridled hatred for Augustine of Hippo. There are some things I respect about Augustine of Hippo, but yes, in the East we basically do blame him for the reason why Western Christianity screwed up. Look at the great evil heretics of the West. Luther and Calvin loved Augustine. Luther, yeah, he was a drunk, manic, depressant, foul-mouthed jerk, right? But Calvin was a monster. This is a cruel man. I mean, the Puritans loved Augustine. It's very scary when, a good tree doesn't bear bad fruit. So if Augustine's such a great guy, if he's better than Chrysostom or the Desert Fathers or John of Damascus or, Ephraim the Syrian, why is there so much horrid fruit coming from Augustine? That might be, I don't know if that's a correct question to ask, but just think about it. The reformers, all these reformers who were big on burning people at the stake and stuff, and the idea of original sin and predestination, it goes right back to Augustine. And when he converted to Christianity, it was the same year that Manichaeanism was outlawed.